Welcome to Author Intelligence, where writing meets innovation. Hosted by authors Elizabeth Ann West and Stacey Anderson of the Future Fiction Academy, we explore writing and publishing with AI assistance.
All right. Hey, Stacey.
Hey, Elizabeth, how are you?
Hot in the hot summer.
Yes, I'm not sure when this is going out, but there is a heat wave with like 99.99% humidity around us, and I'm over it.
Yeah, I wish I was part amphibian. I think for me to be part amphibian. Then I could just like live in water and be fine.
I think I am part amphibian after this point, just with the
I
humidity
still
level
think
now.
I'm part reptilian because I need the humidity. Anytime I go out west and the air is so dry, like my skin just like scales up really bad. Like lotion's not saving that situation. Okay, so until we have our homeostatic, like perfect environment pod of the future, we'll just deal with the heat.
Yeah, for now.
Okay, so our last episode, no matter what he says, size matters. Now we're going to talk about part 2. Size matters. What's the cost?
How much is this size going to cost me?
Yeah, and I think it's important because I know last year we were all banging away, hammering away on Claude 2.0. For those who don't know, I had an API key early on and I shared it with, but there was only like a handful of us and we'd be running it. And yes, it's fractions of a penny, but over time, all of a sudden we had like $300, $400 bills with Claude. Now, granted, we were all hammering on it really hard and some of us were like finishing books with it and things like that. What's the biggest API bill you've had?
Since learning from your lesson and knowing how to keep track of it, and the interfaces inside of all of them have improved to show your usage
Oh,
and how
amen.
to grow. But I think I've had $20, $30 months, nothing bonkers.
And I would say too that we've watched them change their payment methodology. So last year it was pay as you go, but it was like you could be surprised with a nasty bill of limit of amount unless you set a limit. But even if you did set a limit, it was a little bit wonky. Like Claude at that time last year did not have the ability to set a limit. Now it does. Now all of them have moved to pay up front. I think that OpenAI and Anthropic and stuff learned like, oh, people owe us money and they're not paying it. And now we are having to collect.
Yeah. And I like that better too. That way, like at the casino, only taking out, a certain amount of cash. I'm putting $20 in, I'm putting $30 in, I'm putting $10 in, whatever I'm deciding my cap is for this month.
We're not revisiting the ATM. Or if you are revisiting the ATM, you are at least very cognizant about it. You're not just increasing that limit, you're actually like putting more money in.
Oh, yeah.
I do think that it's a smart thing for authors. Most of them now, whether you're using OpenAI, Anthropic, the only one that is right now still, and it's because it's like all of these companies when they first start, they all have pay as you go. We'll settle up with you later. That's where they all start, and then they eventually go to like, no, you have to pay up front. The only one I know of right now that is still like, we'll settle up with you later is Google.
I hope they go to, I don't think they will, but their interface isn't the most user friendly.
No.
So I would like to just deposit my money and not have to worry about checking back until I'm out of it.
So the only stopgap that they really kind of have in their interface is that you can limit how much money you have. This is in the AI studio. When you go to the Google Studio, you're going to go over on the left-hand side to like get an API key. And then there's like a little in there that's like payments. Google is such a kraken. It's a kraken. It's a creature that has like all these tentacles because Google, at this point, Google, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like, with YouTube. Okay. So we have a YouTube account. It's a Google payment system for the payments that have to use my Google Ads account to get paid. There's no mechanism inside of YouTube. Like they centralize the payment aspect of it. And then the other applications and stuff are like appendages of the core payment account. So the AI studio puts bills and charges against my payment account, but so also may my developer console to that payment account. So also will my ads to that payment account. So anytime I owe Google $100, Google's going to charge me.
Also, the Gemini side, if you get the $20 per month, to use there. Right. That's where my cell phone bill comes out of. That's
Since you
saved.
get Google Fi.
'Cause I have Google Fi. It's my Google Drive. My YouTube Premium account are all in that same, which is nice in some ways because like Google Gemini links up with my Google Pixel Android phone and I can actually text Gemini inside of my phone.
Yeah,
My AI assistant is Gemini. So it has some nice benefits. Lots of things are interconnected there.
right. But it's not like Apple interconnected. Like Apple, all my stuff goes through Apple because I have an Apple phone. So I have all my apps and stuff to the App Store, but that means I can go to the App Store and it's like one interface that I can turn everything off
Mhm.
or on. And I think Google has that, but not necessarily. Like you can't turn off your Google Fi in the same interface that you're turning off your Google AI Studio or your Google AI
It's
chat.
not as
Or,
seamless by any means.
no. So these are just things to note. This is why we call this podcast author intelligence. So it's a smart thing to understand how these things are going to charge you, where those charges are going to be, and what are the pitfalls of sometimes you can get surprised by a nasty bill. Some of the newer models and stuff when they first come out, they'll say, oh, just pay us later, like you use it and then you run up a bill. You need to be monitoring that because if you don't, and sometimes there's a delay, like a day or two. So you could click, 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 click. And sometimes you can grow those prompts to like it's $1 a click, $2 a click, especially with these really like expensive models like Claude
Mhm. Yeah, I
which is
think
Claude
that's where my $30, $40 a month came from was Claude Opus when it first dropped.
So this is another math lesson, but this time we have visual aids. So we talked last episode or whatever about all the content. So we have some visual aids. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and that way we can talk about this stuff. Here we have a graphic from Claude. With this kind of reviewing what we talked about last episode about so far in 2024, ChatGPT has gone multimodal with video, images, and audio, but it's stayed at that 128K context. Claude 3, do you know what context they stayed at? Yeah, I believe they have stayed at 200K. And then the Google has launched, 1 million. But when we get down to it, we'll talk about that. There's actually like two tiers to the Google situation. So, graphic here. This is from a couple of months ago when Claude 3 came out in March of 2024. And the reason I'm sharing this is because I think that this is a trend that's going to continue. We're seeing this trend happen with Google, where Google has 1.5 Flash, 1.5 Pro. AI was the first ones to really go, we're going to have different flavors of like GPT-4. We had 4 Turbo. Would you agree,
Mhm.
Stace?
Yes, now for
Yeah.
Omni.
And now 4 Omni. Anthropic went a step further, and when they launched Claude 3, they came out of the gate saying we have 3 flavors of Claude 3. And by flavors, these have different capabilities, different pros and cons, and different costs. And I think that this is also becoming a trend that is very sticking with it too, where we're seeing things in magnitudes of 10. Multipliers of 6 and 10, I think, is what often happens. It's just how it works out, where you'll have like the base model is a tenth of the cost of the best model, roughly. Now, in your experience, Stacy, do the cheaper models that cost a tenth of the cost, do they only write a tenth of good?
No, they don't always write as good exactly,
Mhm.
but if you set up a good either a sequence of prompts or run it through again with an editing prompt, 2 or 3 goes, you can get just as good of an output with the base model as you can with the best model, and even running it those couple extra times, because it's a
Mhm.
tenth of the price, running it 2, 3 times is still doing way better price-wise than running the best model once.
Absolutely. And I think it's the intelligent author that realizes like we're all going to move into a space where there's going to be an ROI calculation with these models where you're going to be balancing. I could pay more for Opus, but it doesn't actually save me on editing. And it's actually better because I might be that kind of writer that whatever task I'm doing with Claude, whether it's brainstorming or writing or editing or whatever, you might be the kind of author that wants a lot of version and you just need to see a lot of version. If you're that kind of a person of like, yeah, I'm going to make it run a marketing plan, but I have FOMO and I think that there's perfectly magic words in there if I just press the button one more time.
Or if you're just the type of person that uses it as a launching off point,
Yeah.
like, "Oh, it's given me these great ideas, now I can go off on my own." The base
You may only
models,
need haiku.
yeah, perfect for that.
Right. And here you're talking about, so it has input and output. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Stacey, the difference between those tokens?
Sure, absolutely. So input is simply your prompt. What are you putting into the LLM?
Mhm.
That could be as simple as please give me 5 story ideas for this genre of novel. That is a very small prompt that would cost you, fractions of a fraction of a fraction of a
Yeah, and you can't relate that. Just it's
it's
free.
nothing.
Practically
It's
free.
free essentially. Two, we were talking about sometimes if you give it a big prompt with an outline and characters and the last few chapters that you've written, you can have 10, 20, 30,000 word prompts. And
Mhm.
that is where this input cost would come in.
Right.
Output is how much it writes to you. Like we said,
Mhm.
that is usually capped by the output limit, which we discussed last time. It is also capped by the prompt. If you only ask for 5 story ideas, it's not going to write you 2,000 words. It-
Mine, but it would be like 400 words per story idea. So if you're like, give me 5 ideas and write me 2 paragraphs per story idea, now you might end up getting, okay, 5 times 2 paragraphs might get you close to that 400 words. So then you are getting 2,000 words. But yeah, that's tricky prompting. And that's the point. Like you can't, it's not going to just give you 2,000 words. Even if you are controlling the parameters and you're like, you have up to 2,000 words, if it doesn't think the answer merits 2,000 words, it's not going to write you 2,000 words.
yeah, exactly. And that's where the output cost would come in. Whatever it writes you is that
Mhm.
cost. And these are in millions of tokens for
Right.
these pricing. And we'll go into that with the math. But
So in the Future Fiction Academy, we have these things called job type, which describes how people like to work with AI. And we have a job type out there called a gardener, which a lot of authors, when they first start working with AI, I would classify them as gardeners. They're picking and choosing how they use AI. They don't like to use AI for writing, which is cool. We get it. They use AI, like you say, give me 5 story ideas, that kind of.
mhm,
When you're a gardener, a lot of times your prompt is very short, output is bigger. So your ratios, and this is where ratios come in, you're going to use all the middle school and high school math you learned, never have been used as an author. So your ratio of input to output, if you're one of those authors who likes to do a lot of short little prompting and you're getting a lot more words out of the AI than what you're going in, your ratios are going to be where you're paying more of your cost is coming in that higher price point, that $1.25 per million tokens versus the 25 cents per million token when you're looking at like say haiku. What would you say for like other job types that are doing more of like the here's my story so far? How does that ratio change?
it can maybe for, let's say, a weaver who is someone that likes to pick and choose between AI and their own words and kind of intermesh them. They might give a big swatch of story and then say, write a transition to this next scene. And that's all they
Yep.
want is the transition or a description for this next. So it might be a very heavy input,
Input.
very heavy prompt because they're giving it lots of back information where it's a smaller output because they're just asking for 2 or 300 words just to bridge that gap.
Absolutely. And then there are those of us who are like the bakers and the architects. And bakers like to run lots of different versions of the same scene. So a lot of times their scene prompt will often be at least 1,000 words, if not more. So it can be anywhere between 1,000 to like 9,000 words. And then their output are going to be, their individual prompt will be, the first ratio will be like 9,000 input to maybe like 2,000 output. But they'll run that thing 5 times across 5 different models.
Run it in Opus, run it in Sonnet, run it in Haiku, go over to GPT-4o. There are just have to
Yeah.
see how all the differences come out across the different parameter or
And
LLM.
if you're using Rexy as a tool, which we have in the Future Fiction Academy, I know bakers who set up their word bangers to where it's the same prompt, but then they set the AI settings for each of those sequences. So basically, it's a sequence of running the prompt through 5 different AI. And they click one button, and all of a sudden, they get all of those output, all those versions to mash them together just to see what happens. Not accusing anyone, Stacey.
It's too early in the day to be attacked like this, Elizabeth.
Stacey's a baker, y'all. But I'm an architect, but I'm sometimes a baker. But architects, we have the problem of, especially with like the new go with God methodology, where I'm just giving the story so far, like we just, that input gets magnitude bigger. I actually push the limit. I have run stuff where I have about 40,000 words in the input just to get 2,000 words of response. So my ratios are really like out of whack. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this. So let's take a look at how this shapes up when we are doing a cost comparison of the Claude models here. So this was something I shared on our YouTube channel back in March. So if you want to go take a look at that, we did a very in-depth look at Claude 3 when it first came out. This table here, it's a little bit wonky in the sense that we have our conversion rate here, 750 words to 1,000 tokens. Now, what some people don't know is in the early days, all of 2 years ago, the early days of pricing, everything was per 1,000 tokens. We were such sweet summer children. OpenAI started off with pricing per 1,000 tokens. And I think that was because back then we were only dealing with models that could do 4,000 tokens, 8,000 tokens. We were talking about smaller places. And then once Claude came out with 100K tokens, all of a sudden the pricing went to per million tokens. And so, I mean, early days of pricing AI, I can remember being like, oh, GPT-4 is 3 cents per 1,000 tokens input, 6 cents per 1,000 tokens output. We still have this memorized. Now we have to talk about it in terms of millions per words. And if you're looking at Claude 4.0 is $5 per 1 million of tokens of input right now. And it is $15 for 1 million of tokens of output. So we have that 3-to-1 ratio, basically. And I think we see that too in the same pricing here with Claude. If you want to take a look at like, what are some of these ratios? Okay. So what would be the ratio of Haiku, the input and the output? 25 cents, 1 to 5. So 25 cents, there's 25 cents in $1.25. So I think that is like a 5-to-1 ratio. Yeah, 5-to-1. It's a 5-to-1 ratio. So basically you're going to get 5x the amount of input to the cost of one output. So you could do 5 million input tokens, because that would cost you $1.25 per 1 million, the same cost for 1 million of output, which would also cost you $1. All the models for Claude 3 are a 5-to-1 ratio of output to input, meaning your output is going to cost 5 times as much as your input will. And that matters, I think, because it's just interesting to see these ratios. Now, we were crazy. And we did actually do a calculation per word here. And you can see this on YouTube, but we're going to go ahead and say it out loud. So if you're trying to do this calculation, we did it based off of 750 words for 1,000 tokens. So the equation for this, and this is why we don't calculate per word, y'all, just so you know. If you were talking about Haiku, for the cost per word for output with Haiku, you'd have to take $1.25 and then divide that by 1 million so that you get the price per token. So if we know that 750 words is 1,000 tokens, so it's 750 over 1,000, and then you would convert it all. So we ended up getting 0.00000. That's 5 zeros. If you're listening, 0.000000167. Now, as far as a penny goes, so the penny would be the 2 zeros. It's 0.0001 penny. That would be a tenth of a penny, 100th of a penny, 1,000. It's 1/10,000th of a penny per word. This is why we don't calculate it per word, people. And I think that that's interesting because the history of publishing, we used to calculate, like if you were doing, I can remember my early days of SEO writing and stuff like that. I would get paid 5 cents a word, 3 cents a word, 2 cents a word. A lot of literary magazines and stuff pay per word. When you ghostwrite, typically it's a pay per word situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we calculate that.
Yeah. Usually when you pay per word, it is pennies per word, not fractions of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a penny per word.
Right. So what we did is we went ahead and converted that to what would 1,000 words cost you as output for Haiku. And that one's a little bit easier to wrap your brain around. It's 0.001667. So that is a tenth of a penny. 1 penny gets you 10,000 words. So output for 50,000 words, a novel, and this is with haiku, 8 cents.
We finally got up
Total
to
cost,
actual money.
we got up to actual money. Now, this is the haiku model. This is the cheapest model and it's the fastest. They say it's the dumbest. It's not as smart as the other models. Quite frankly, I find haiku works great if you ask it to do something and then ask it if it can improve its answer 2 or 3 times. You can get the level of quality that you would get out of Opus. And you're still saving yourself a ton of money because you're only paying, because the difference in the cost between haiku and Opus is magnitudes. It's $75 for a million output of Opus, and it's only $1.25 for a million token output for haiku. That's a 60x cost. So unless you're having to click the button 60 times, you're going to say, if you are clicking the button on haiku less than 60 times and getting output that you would compare to Opus, you're saving yourself money. I would say haiku can improve its answer pretty well. Now, there's
Yeah.
a model in the middle here, which is Sonnet. Sonnet is 12 times the cost of haiku. So again, it's the same thing. If you are using haiku and you learn how to prompt, this is why prompting can save you a lot of money. You learn how to prompt and say, hey, haiku, you write me this scene. Okay, can you improve your answer by making the dialogue less expected? Can you rewrite that and make the visual details better or something like that? What would be some examples if you were writing a newsletter with haiku and you needed to do like different versions of
Yeah, for a newsletter, I would ask it for how to make more personal connections with the readers, how to show more excitement with my new release, or you would layer it on.
it?
So that way it would run through and produce better output over several iterations. And then it will bring itself up to the level of Sonnet or Opus.
Exactly. I actually have a hypothesis. It's factual, but I've worked with AI enough and I tested this in the FFA and shown it. I think Claude 3 is one model. I think that on the back end, there's shenanigans where it's running it again and again and again to like improve its answer. And that's why the difference in pricing is. So it's actually running a lot more times when you get Opus, running a lot more times to Sonnet, but it's the same model because otherwise I don't understand why you can get with a few extra run, you can get haiku to the level of Sonnet. And with a few extra revisions of Sonnet, you can get Sonnet to the level of Opus for now.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of merit to that. So when I have this pricing sheet, I can look and say, okay, I can bring haiku up to the level of sonnet. I can bring sonnet up to the level of opus, but there is a time consideration because I do
Yeah.
have to run that prompt multiple times. So looking at kind of my time versus this cost, I usually go with sonnet because after testing them, I found for the price, I can get the best results the fastest for the least amount of money using that. Again, your mileage may vary based on your prompting style, but this gives us a very good structure and framework to work from.
Right. And just to reiterate, all this is going to be 1 million tokens. So haiku, 1 million of tokens of input is a quarter. 1 million of tokens of output is $1.25. A million tokens is the equivalent of 750,000 words. I'm going to put this in word, okay? So that people can really understand this at home who are listening in your car or you're driving. This is why we are so outspoken at the FFA about how much AI is going to change it. And I don't care if people like publishers are not using it. Baloney. If they're not using it today, they're going to be using it really soon because it is dirt cheap to get content out of it. So haiku, 750,000 words of input, quarter. I could take 750,000 words of a book series, stick it into this LLM. If it could process that, it can't in one go, but it could. And it would only cost me a quarter to put that in there. The output, 750,000 words of output, $1.25. That's not even $2 for 750,000 words. I'm sorry, that's not even $2 for 1.5 million words between the input and the output. Like you could go ham on haiku, and I don't know, you might get a bill at the end of the year for $5.
Yeah.
Sonnet, I would say Sonnet is probably the most popular model for authors today, writing wise. They find that the voice of Claude, a lot of writers find that Claude fits their voice very well. Some writers really don't like it. They think that it's very purple prosy. It's a preference thing. But again, we're back at that 750,000 words of input on Sonnet, $3. $3 for 750,000 words of input across multiple prompts. $15 for 750,000 words of output. And that's Sonnet. And Sonnet writes really well. And then you want to do the honors of the last one, Opus, the most expensive.
Yes. So again, 750,000 words in. That is an entire fantasy series could run
Mhm.
that. $15 for the input, $75 to get that same amount, 750,000 words out. So if you go ham and write a fantasy series,
Yep.
750,000 words, you have paid $90. Again,
Right.
compared to $1.50, that does sound a lot, but compared to any other method on the planet for getting 750,000 words, that is nothing.
And by the way, you guys, some of these are the most expensive models that are out there right now. There are cheaper models. There are free models in the open source world that are haiku level quality of writing, and you can just get it for free. $3, free. So hopefully you did not crash your car just now listening to this or, losing it. But I really stress this because it's less than $100 for using the most advanced models out there and doing whatever task and running 750,000 words of input and output. And it's less than $100. No one can hire a ghostwriter for that. Now you can start to understand why publishers are talking about replacing their ghostwriters. And I think it's only a matter of time before and publishers will probably not even talk about it. They'll just do it where there's no longer a need for a slush pile, no longer a need for it. We can just make our slush pile. So going through our foundational models here, we're going to go over a little bit on foundational models. We talked about this a little bit in our last episode about what makes a foundational model. This is going to be kind of word salad, guys, but we want you to understand that it has turned into a little bit of a game of who the heck belongs to who. Yeah. OpenAI. So when you hear these words, they're pretty interchangeable with OpenAI. Their tooling is ChatGPT, which most of you are aware of, and then Playground, which is what the FFA talks about a lot on our YouTube channel. And also we talked about that in our earlier episode about the tokens and how the tokens even work. So Playground is what lets you access via the API where you're paying as you go. ChatGPT is free or it's a flat cost of 20. Right now it's $20 a month. I expect those monthly costs to go up. What do you think, Stacey?
Yeah, I'm hoping they grandfather people in, but I'm expecting for all we get for ChatGPT. And for those of you who don't know, not only does it include that word generation, there's Dolly image generation
Yes.
now. There's a lot more features, which again, we could fill an entire episode on just what we can do inside of there. But maybe we should. It's a good idea. But $20 I could see as a bargain that might not last forever.
I agree. I think if you can afford it, now is a really good time to get in. And also sometimes when they launch new models and stuff like that, they actually close signups. Like you get put on a waiting list because their demand is too much. OpenAI has millions of users worldwide who are using it. And I anticipate sometime by next year, we'll probably hear that they have 1 billion customers. So models. So we talked about the tooling. So the tool is where you use a model. So I'm going to say a lot of model names here. You can't access all of these in chat. Some of these models are only available inside of Playground. So there's early models still available that companies and stuff are using for RAG, which we briefly touched on. That's probably another podcast episode. That is retrieval augmented generation. And what that means is there's a new technology out there where they're kind of like summarizing things at the paragraph level to allow the AI to more easily access that information quickly. Like it's taking a large chunk of information and making it teeny tiny for the purposes of really taking advantage of those smaller context windows. So that's like Babbage and there's I think a DaVinci that's inside of Playground. Then you have 3.516K. I don't know how much longer 3.5 is going to be around. I have a feeling it's probably going to get sunset by next year. What do you think?
I would think so. Right now, 3.5 is the very low cost for OpenAI. Maybe that means one of the GPT-4 models will come down in price significantly when they release GPT-5.
Right. So I could see that them once they sunset 3.516K, what will end up happening is Turbo will GPT-4 Turbo will take over because GPT-4 Turbo is 128K context and it's cheaper than Omni.
Yeah.
It also writes better than GPT-4. So the other models that GPT OpenAI has is GPT-4, GPT-4 Turbo. And like we really expected 4.5 to be the next thing. And then they threw us all a curveball with no, GPT-4 Omni. I don't know what OpenAI's like. They started their earliest models were named after scientists, Ada, Babbage, Curie, and then Da Vinci. And I was like, Einstein's got to be next. Einstein. Nope. It's like Android switching from desserts to now we're just going to do numbers, and we're all very confused. Okay, and then we have Anthropic. You want to tackle Anthropic?
Sure. So Anthropic has very similar tools to OpenAI. It has Claude Chat, which is the
Mhm.
equivalent to Chat GPT. It's where you chat inside for either for free or $20 per month. It has Workbench, which has some different functionality and different look and layout than Playground, but is essentially the same thing. It is the developer side where you can use the API tool inside of Anthropic.
Right.
There's outside software that lets you kind of plug your key in, but these are the ones
Mhm.
that are native to Anthropic. And I don't think Anthropic has sunset any of their models yet. They're all still
I don't.
available.
I don't believe so. I think everything is available. Actually, they try.
They did try to sunset Claude 2.0 in favor of Claude 2.1. But what happened was 2.1, it didn't work for writers at all. Like
No.
that was the big Claude apocalypse. Claude can't write fiction anymore. The AI world is crumbling and burning. And for they actually listened to us and
Mhm.
were in the paid chat at the time. You could then, or through the API, you could switch back and forth. So if Claude 2.1 wasn't working for you, you could switch back to Claude 2.0 and they've left it there since.
Yes. They learned their lesson that sometimes but what happened was is they were trying to make 2.1 very accurate, and they didn't really know there was no experience up to that point of like what happens when you make a model really, really accurate. When you train it, that it always has to be correct. Well, now it has no imagination. Claude 2.1 became the most boring adult ever, and it couldn't imagine anything.
Yeah, it was saying, I cannot write fiction. The famous, I do not feel comfortable doing this.
Yes, but let's have a discussion about the merits of literature. It was like your most boring English professor replaced all of your creative writing professors. So
Yes.
it was within 2 weeks, they had a new interface for us. And they even like nodded to us. They said, for those creative types out there, you can use this interface to go back to revert back to 2.0 because now we know 2.1 doesn't work for you.
Yep. So they still have Claude 1.0, which was the original in Slack
Mhm.
sort of thing. We have Claude 2.0 and 2.1, and then Claude 3.0, which is the Opus, Sonnet, and Haiku. And very recently, when we're recording the podcast, at least, Claude 3.5 Sonnet has just released. So that is the next
Yes.
level. And I'm assuming Opus and Haiku will follow at some point. Maybe by the time this is released, who knows?
Right. Yeah. That's the thing. Every couple of weeks, I would say every 6 to 12 weeks, we're getting a new model from one of the foundations. And we're just covering the foundations, by the way, guys. There's hundreds, probably thousands of open source models at this point. And we're going to do a whole episode on open source. Our next episode actually will be talking about that, about not writing not safe for work content with open source models. So we're not going to leave you hanging. Okay. So moving on to Google. Google was late. Google was so late coming into the party with something that was actually decent. I think we all can remember Bard coming out first, and it was like, by the time Bard came out live for everybody, GPT-4 existed. So the quality of Bard was like worse than 3.5, I would. And then Palm, I played with Palm like a couple of times, and I'm like, this is like the level of Da Vinci 2 or Da Vinci 3. And so there was like this big gap for a while between like OpenAI was the best. And then slowly models have caught up to where if I had to tell you my favorite model today to write with, actually Gemini 1.5 Pro. And if you had asked me this 2 weeks ago, I would have said Google 4.0. And if you'd asked me 2 weeks before that, I would have told you Claude. It's an ever moving mark about how well these models are when they come out with new stuff. So again, Google's tools are Google AI Studio and Google LLM Notebook. And then their models are Bard and Palm, which are practically defunct at this point. You'll hear maybe Vertex talked about in some places, but that's mostly just in the Google Developer Console. Big models that you're going to encounter most as an author are Gemini 1.0, Gemini 1.5 Flash, and Gemini 1.5. So, and then our last foundational model, and it's kind of weird that we're including it, honestly, because it's got a lot of asterisks on it, but I think it's important to talk about this. So, if you have been up in arms about Facebook, Meta, Instagram and stuff, training on all of your threads and feeds and all of that stuff. The good news is they're actually giving back to common knowledge. And Stacey, I'll let you take that away if you want to and talk about.
Sure, absolutely. So there is Meta, Facebook has the Llama models, and they do actually have this is not discussed a lot, but they do have their own console. If you go to Meta AI, you can play with them all there. They have their three models, Llama 1, Llama 2, Llama 3, easy enough to remember. They are a foundational model, but I would say they are right now behind where the other
Mhm.
ones are. We'll see that both in the terms of the context window, the pricing does reflect that as well. But Facebook being Facebook, I do feel this will catch up. Just like if you asked us a few weeks ago, we might have not been as impressed with Google's AI. I'm not super impressed with the Llama models. They're fine, they're okay, but I feel like we have to keep an eye on them to catch up.
We say that. However, what you all do not know in preps for this podcast, okay, we went to the Meta AI and then Stacey and I got sucked in for about 10 minutes because there was like a little thing that we could click on in the Meta AI and it was like 1990s music trivia. And I was like, let's see. It was giving us like Who Wrote Jagged Little Pill? And we're like, Alanis Morissette.
That is true. The only reason we got out after only 10 minutes is we set a timer.
Yes, because we are smart about this now. When we're on task for something, we ask our other robot. Sorry for the off tangent, but the important part is, or Facebook, these open source models. Here's the cool thing about Llama that does not get talked about. If you have a strong enough computer, we talked about this last podcast, that there's a physical world component to computing these. If you have a gaming computer, if you have, the new whiz bang processors and things like that, you can actually download Llama 3 in its entirety and run it on your computer and become sufficient at fine tuning it and training it. That's what all these open source models, they're basically a Llama model core. And then they're disabling the moderation files that come with it. Then they're additionally training it. And that's how you're getting models like Midnight Rose and other ones out there. And actually, another foundational model that we didn't talk about is Mistral, which is also open source from France. We'll talk about that more when we do open source ones. Most of you aren't using Mistral or even Llama 3 unless you're using Open Router and doing not safe for work. But that's when we'll talk about those models in depth. What do you think about open source models, even if they can't be as capable of these bigger foundational models? Do you think it's a good check on the marketplace for AI development?
I think so. It gives us more options. It shows that not safe for work is not going against the spirit of their terms and service. It's being
Mhm.
used for fictional writing, which has been accepted for a long time. So we're
Right.
not using it to create how to torture someone. We're creating it in a thriller scene. And I think these open source models are allowing us, again, as creatives, as authors, as all these other industries, to show there is a place for a lot of different types of content and for these lower cost content.
Yeah. So the last little bit, I know this is running long. 'Cause we talk about the math for days. Coming down to this table, and we'll talk about this a little bit. So we have here some of the context windows and the max outputs. Do you want to cover some of that?
Sure, I'll go over it. So we have our 4 foundational systems, and we have the best model currently available for each. So, like I said, these aren't the haikus, these aren't the cheapest models. These are actually right now it's 3.5 Sonnet, so these are the higher level models. So we have ChatGPT-4 Omni by OpenAI. It has a total context window of 128K, a max output of 5K. Price per million tokens input is $5. Price per million tokens output is $15. So then we have Claude 3.5 Sonic from Anthropic, 200K context, 4K output, $3 per million input, $15 per million output.
Okay. So
And
we're right there. So
mhm,
the only difference between Chat 4, Omni, the best models between OpenAI and Anthropic right now. I'd say that those are the top two models. Gemini is going to overtake. I have no doubt, because I've been writing with Gemini and it's awesome. But we don't see in the other communities people being like, Gemini, Gemini, Gemini. Most people talk about Claude or they talk about OpenAI, ChatGPT.
Yes.
The only difference between the best models right now, between Chat and Claude, is that Claude has a bigger context window, 200K versus 128K.
Mhm.
They both have the same max output of 4,000 tokens. And then output price is the same, $15 per million. You only save a little bit with Anthropic because it's a $3 input versus a $5 input.
Yeah. So between
That's
these
it.
two best models, it's really a personal preference on both your prompting style and how you like their output. They're not interchangeable, but they're very, very similar in which one you could and should use.
Yeah, I think authors kind of come down on preference of one or the other. If you like OpenAI, you usually have an objection to Claude's writing. And if you like Claude, you have an objection to OpenAI. So it's kind of interesting. And it's not by genre. It's really just by authors' personalities and their voices. So I know fantasy authors who like chat because it does a little bit better with keeping the facts straight or sticking to the facts. We know that chat is better at following instructions than Claude. No offense to Anthropic, but your boy Claude is he's a little interesting. So we'll substitute your instructions and put his own.
Claude does not care.
Right. But ChatGPT can be very clinical in its discussions, its writing, especially when it's writing fiction. It can be very clinical of like the dialogue is very wooden and stiff. I see a lot of echolalia in dialogue with OpenAI models where it's like, did you go to the store? Yes, the store was very busy and I went. Like anytime a character says something, the other character is like repeating the noun or the verb, the core thing in the response back, which most people don't do in real life.
Hmm.
So those are the two biggies, and there's not really much difference. So whichever one you like of those, they're pretty much on par with the cost, and we'll talk about that last cost comparison that we have. Gemini. So, and Gemini's kind of somewhere in the middle between Llama 3 and like Gemini, I would say is trying to catch up in adoption. So I would say their context caching, which we talked about in the last episode, could be a game changer. And they also do have this tool, the LLM notebook tool, where you can basically RAG your entire Google Drive. That has been a struggle for chat and for Omni, or I'm sorry, for OpenAI and for Anthropic. They don't really have a good system yet out of the box. Like if you're a programmer and stuff, you can make your own RAG system. Google's actually making RAG available to end users through their notebook. And you're actually teaching on that in a few weeks in the FFA. But what are the basis of that? What does that mean when I say you can RAG your Google Drive?
Basically, I was in the beta of the notebook, so I've seen it come a long way. It was originally for academics. It's a notebook system like you would have Evernote. You can upload your PDFs and essentially it was one of the first ones doing this, read the PDF that you upload, summarize it and have all the information there. It has expanded that to now it connects to your Google Drive and you can take any of your documents, any of your PDFs, any of your videos,
Mhm.
audio, anything that's inside your Google Drive, you can then bring in, summarize, use as reference. You can have multiple ones in your notebooks. So it is really helpful specifically for research, which I think is where the basis is in, like academic research. But again, if you have all your story information inside of Google Drive, it can bring it all in and consolidate, put it together right there in this one app.
Right. And I'm blown away. I've been playing with Google last couple of weeks, actually last week, writing with it. He's hysterical. If you ask him to write comedy, do not be drinking a beverage while you're rereading what he writes. I'm just gonna say. Let's referee. I mean, we were all in stitches while reading some of the stuff that it came out with. So Llama 3. Llama 3 is super cheap. Big difference here. Gemini Pro, we didn't talk about this. It has a context window of 128K or a million. So let me explain that. If your prompt is less than 128K, you'll have the 128K pricing. As soon as your prompt starts getting beyond 128,000 tokens, so like you're putting your entire library in there, especially for like if you're doing a lot of Google documents in your Google Drive, this is where that million token context is going to come into play. You'll bump up in pricing. The pricing like doubles when you go to 1 million. So anything between 129,000 tokens and 1 million will be double the price. 128,000 tokens and smaller will be the lower price. So both of them. Now, Google's leading the charge in the max output, which is 8K. I've not seen Google write me 3,000 or 4,000 words. I can kind of get it up there a little bit with like some chain of thought prompting and stuff like that. Write longer, write longer, write longer. It can repeat a lot of information and then add something there. So it might be really good for editing applications moving forward, but doesn't out of the box on like one prompt write you 6,000 words in
Yeah,
my
I've
experience.
gotten closer to 800 to 1,200 on a good prompt.
So the price input for per million tokens, again, if you're up to 128K, context window, 350. So that's we're in the middle between Claude 3.5 Sonnet at $3 and $5 for Omni, and Google Gemini 1.5 Pro is going to cost you 350. Now, if you move into that context window that's bigger by magnitude than either Claude or Chat has, you're at $7 per million tokens for the input. And then the output is 1050 for the smaller context window and $21 for the bigger one. Llama, real simple. It's almost not even a contender. We're just putting it here because we want you to be aware about the open source capabilities of Meta and Llama 3. It only has a context window of 8,000 tokens. And over things like, why are we even bothering?
A year ago, we would have been delighted with that.
Yeah.
Ecstatic.
We feel like, oh my God, let it down now. Too much, too much. But the big takeaway for Llama 3 and where a lot of authors are adopting Llama 3, especially if they have that gaming computer, they can run it on their computer. They do not have to be hooked up to the internet. They are not going to be paying or anything like that. Now, if you access Llama 3 through Open Router, which we recommend Open Router is a great place to access all of these models, you only pay 81 cents per million, whether it's input or output. That's why it's so flat cost, because they have such a small context window of only 8K. Your prompting and stuff, it's always going to be pretty much the same ratio.
Yeah.
And the most amount of tokens a Llama 3 can write back to you is only 2K. So it's half the output of ChatGPT 4 and Claude as far as an answer goes. And it's 25% of what Google claims is the max that their model can put out. Okay, real class, we'll wrap up with what all this means. So we came up with a metrics for intelligent authors, for author intelligence, the idea of this price per first chapter. Do you want to take it away?
Sure. So we just assumed that you were going to have a 1,500 word chapter. That
Yep.
might give or take depending on your genre, writing style, whatnot. But we thought 1,500 was a nice middle of the road number. Plus, that gave us a nice round number. That means it is 2,000 output tokens. So that is the pricing that we're working on, 2K output. We were a little more generous. We said you had, especially for a first chapter, you'd have a just shy of a 4,000 word prompt that you were using, which then is 5,000 input tokens. So that's how we base the pricing: 5,000 input tokens, 2,000 output tokens.
And I mean, 4,000 words for a prompt, it's 3,750 words for the prompt. What kind of elements would you be able to include in a prompt that size? So I was trying to get the first chapter written by like Claude or Omni or Gemini Pro. And also this also works with inside of Llama 3. That's another reason why we did this example, because they only have an 8K content. I mean, 3,750 words. If you had to make that as a prompt, Stacey, what kind of components and stuff would you include in that prompt?
I could have a character list with character descriptions, with arcs for all the characters, with a list of settings and some description on those. I could have not only a full outline, but kind of a detailed beat prompt, like
Yeah.
30,
A scene.
3,700 words can go pretty
Mhm.
far when you put it together. I can give
Yep.
you all the bones of the story to give to the.
Exactly. So 7,000 total tokens. So we're lower than all these context windows. This represents like a slice. So if you were working with like Llama 3 and it only has an 8K, basically, and this is what we used to have to do last year, you'd have a prompt to get chapter 1 written for you, that 1,500 word chapter. And then you'd have to go back to your prompt and like swap out the information and put information in for chapter 2. And then you could run chapter 2. So we used to have to work in slices like this. With these bigger models, F that. The go with God methodology just like gives this big prompt and we just go with it. So we're doing this as a ratio so that we have like a standardized ratio to compare these models of how much would it really cost you in cents to get that first chapter. And you can go ahead. I know you'll want to talk about Chat 4 and Claude.
Okay, so this is in cents, like
Set.
pennies. Mm,
Mhm.
Cents. 100 pennies to a dollar is what we're talking about. Chat 40 for Omni, 5.5 cents for that 1,500 word first chapter. Again, with the prompt, with the output. Claude
Yeah.
3.5 Sonnet is 4.5 cents. Gemini 1.5 Pro, again, the best model, 3.9, just shy of 4 cents. And Llama 3 is zero point 0.6 cents. So
Point six. So
zero point 0.6. You'd have to cut a penny into in a little bigger than half.
you need to run 2 chapters in Llama 3 before you spend a penny.
Yeah, before you're actually up to coin money.
And we're steering this so that if you did not understand anything else, and you're like, oh, all these numbers and stuff like that. The truth is, Gemini 1.5 Pro, Claude 3.5 Sonnet, Chat 4. If you're using Chat 4 Omni, you're using these models and you're using them in the API. And when we say the API, it's because there's a lot more software on the market these days that allow you to bring your own key. There's Rexy, which the Future Fiction Academy has. But there's also Typing Mind. There's also Novel Crafter. And I think that there's new things coming out every single day with this bring your own key model because authors are realizing if I bring my own key, I'm in control over how much I'm running and all of that. Other software is doing like a credit system. It's very convoluted. People can't really fully understand very well how their money is being spent. But when you bring your own key, you can very quickly see, oh, I ran that chapter and that was, you know, 6,000 input tokens, 2,000 output tokens, and it cost me 6 cents. And they'll put it in a spreadsheet for you for most of the providers. Now, one thing that this metric is limited on, and I want to emphasize this is only the first chapter, guys, so that we had a comparison. We had a stick in the ground that we could compare everything to. When you would go run that second chapter in Omni or Claude, you included the words that were in the first chapter. Now your input tokens would move from 5K, 7K. And then when you ran the third chapter, now you're at 9K. Your output cost would pretty much stay the same, but your input token is usually where it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, that compound interest thing that we were talking about. Except Google, which is now starting a cache system. So we'll see how that plays out. All right. So any final thoughts about this size matters and what's the cost?
So yeah, it's a little overwhelming with all the math.
Mhm.
But when you just break it down, it's just simply knowing what you're spending and being in control of how much you use, how much you spend. And that way you're not reliant on, I have so many credits per month or I have so many. You can use as much as you want, knowing how much it'll cost you. Bring your bring your wallet to the table, take out as much as you're going to spend that month or whatever, and you can do that.
And when it's gone, and now you're writing the old fashioned way, or you're dictating, or you're coming up with your own marketing plan, or you're doing your own brainstorming, or what have you. Or
Yeah.
some intelligent authors I've seen, they use the API up to a certain amount, and then they go over to the $20 flat fee stuff, and they use that methodology, or they'll use the $20 as much as they can, and then once they hit the max amount of messages per 3 hours or whatever the limit is on that model, then they switch over to their API. So
Mhm.
I've seen some really budget savvy, intelligent authors really kind of like, all right, $20. Yeah, I'm gonna get my $20 worth every single day.
Yeah. I've done that I have both the chat and the API. So I'll use, if there's something I feel Opus is better in, I jump into the chat for that because that's much
You're
more.
already paying for it.
Yeah, I'm already paying for it and I get the $20, hit my limit for that. And then I'll go to something I can use Sonnet for via API.
So I think that there's lots of applications here. And I think a lot of authors are going to stay in that $20 a month flat fee chat interface, whether you're using Claude chat, Google chat, whatever. But then there is another subset of authors who are going to go a next level deeper, and they're going to start, figuring out, well, I don't even have to pay the $20. I can just $8, $3. I mean, when you're talking about haiku level running, if you like haiku and you're the kind of author like, I just did haiku to write the first draft and then I'm going to completely rewrite it. We have a lot of authors in the Future Fiction Academy who do it. Like to use AI to get the first draft And then I have that open on one side. And then I'm sitting here typing each word and I'm rewriting it with added stuff and all of that. And I'm cutting what I don't like and all of that. At that point, you can you can do 1,000,000 tokens of output for less than $2.
Yeah. Or if
So
you like, I like ChatGPT 4.0 for making my writing or making my plans and my writing briefs, and Claude or
yeah,
Gemini for writing. That's 20, 40, $60 if I want all three in the chat unlimited, where it's pennies to
it
dollars
could be
to,
$20 for the whole month if you were actually using that at a key level with like Recipe or Typing Mind.
yeah, exactly. So I don't need to, I can use different models without having
Mhm.
3, 4 different subscriptions.
Right. So yeah, API opens the door for you to not use subscriptions, but you're going to have to kind of understand your hyperparameters and working with key situation. It's not hard. You put the key in and you just watch it. It's not difficult.
It's
I
once you set up the key.
set it up and monitor it.
Yeah, exactly like you would a Facebook ad, an Amazon
Yeah.
ad. I don't let any of mine go. Just set
Even
it
if
up.
I have that limit, I don't trust it.
Mm-mm. I go check
Check
it.
in. Yeah. Check in. All right. So next time, we're still going to continue the size matters spiel. So we've done size matters, how big it is, context window. Size matters, how much it costs. And the next one is size matters, performance. And we're going to move into blowjobs and torture scenes with not safe for work model
Well, I look forward to that. I think this will be my favorite episode. Whatever do
coming up. Yeah.
coming up the next.
All right. I'll see you next time, Stace.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Take care, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to Author Intelligence, brought to you by the Future Fiction Academy. We hope you have enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, or better yet, share it with another writing friend. Stay creative and see you in the next episode.